In 2023, a man stood on a rooftop in front of a crowd of thousands, raised his fists in the air, and incinerated a protester with his eyes while the crowd cheered. The night air was thick with chanting, with the smell of smoke and electricity, with the roar of people who had decided that what they were witnessing was not a murder but a demonstration. That man was Homelander, and what happened next changed everything. By the time the final season of The Boys arrived, Homelander was not a superhero pretending to be a villain. He was something more specific and more disturbing than that. He was a man who had spent his entire life locked in a glass box, raised not by parents but by scientists, fed not love but data, told not who he was but what he was worth to Vought International. The hallways he grew up in were fluorescent and sterile. The voices he heard most consistently belonged to people holding clipboards. And somewhere inside that upbringing, something fundamental had been destroyed before it ever had a chance to form. The question the show kept asking was not whether Homelander was evil. That answer was obvious by season 2. The real question was whether a person raised the way he was raised, stripped of attachment, stripped of consequence, conditioned to see himself as both product and God, could ever be anything else. Could he choose differently? And if he could, would he? The show sat with that question without flinching, turned it over slowly, let it become uncomfortable in the way that only true things can. Here is what most people miss when they talk about Homelander's ending. They focus on the laser vision. They focus on the kills. They focus on the rallies and the fascist imagery and the Vought propaganda. But the most important scene in Homelander's entire arc does not involve any of that. It involves a mirror. In Season 4, there is a moment where Homelander stands alone and talks to his own reflection. The room is dim, all hard surfaces and cold light. His breathing is audible. His hands are still, not metaphorically alone, literally. He speaks to himself as if there are two people in the room, his voice shifting register between sentences, one tone polished and projected, the other something rower and less controlled. One of them is the Homelander the public sees, the flag cape, the square jaw, the voice engineered to sound like the father America never had. The other is the thing underneath, small, terrified, furious. A child who was put in a sensory deprivation tank at age 4 because the scientists at Vought needed to measure his stress responses, and nobody thought to ask whether it would break him. You can see the moment he recognizes both of them, the way his face moves through something that is almost grief before it seals itself off again. That scene is the key to understanding everything that comes after. Because Homelander's descent in the final season is not a villain becoming more villainous. It is a man who has finally stopped pretending the two halves of himself can coexist. For years, he maintained the performance. He smiled on television. He shook hands. He said the words. He laughed at the right moments and modulated his volume and tilted his chin at the angle that tested best in Vaught's focus groups. But the performance required a level of self-suppression that was always unsustainable, because the thing he was suppressing was not a dark impulse. It was his entire interior life. Everything real about him had been classified, contained, and redirected into usefulness for Vought since before he could walk. When that containment broke, it did not break slowly. It detonated. By the time Season 4 reaches its midpoint, Homelander has done something that even his most devoted supporters inside the show's world find difficult to defend. He has begun operating without the mask entirely. Not the physical mask. Homelander never wore one, but the social one. The calibration that every powerful person uses to manage how much of themselves they show at any given moment. He stopped calibrating. He said what he thought in real time. He punished people for micro-expressions he did not like. He demanded not just compliance but visible worship, and he could tell the difference, because he had spent decades learning to read fear disguised as admiration. He had learned it the way other children learn to read clocks, out of necessity, because survival depended on it. This is where the show becomes something more than a superhero satire. Because what it is actually depicting, with uncomfortable precision, is what happens when someone who was never given the internal architecture for empathy acquires the external architecture for total control. The two things together do not produce a stable system. They produce acceleration. Every action Homelander takes in the final stretch of the series is faster and larger than the one before it. The escalation is not random. It follows a logic, a cold and internally consistent logic that the show traces with almost clinical patience. Each time he acts without consequence, The threshold for what requires a response gets lower. A protester who says the wrong thing, an aide who hesitates for half a second too long, a news anchor who uses a tone he interprets as condescension. The circle of acceptable behavior around him contracts and contracts until almost nothing is safe, and the people nearest to him begin to feel it like a change in air pressure, something atmospheric, something that makes the body want to make itself smaller. And the people around him adapt. This is the detail the show handles better than almost anything else in the genre. The adaptation of ordinary people to proximity with unchecked power. His staff learn new micro-behaviors. They learn not to make direct eye contact for more than 2 seconds. They learn to begin sentences with agreement before introducing any information that might be unwelcome. They learn to laugh at exactly the right volume. They become, without realizing it, a kind of living instrument calibrated entirely to his emotional state. They wake up in the morning and perform a kind of internal audit before they leave the house. What mood was he in yesterday? What topics need to be avoided? What posture communicates safety? It is exhausting in the way that all sustained fear is exhausting, and they cannot name it, because naming it would require acknowledging something none of them are prepared to acknowledge out loud. Ryan watches all of this. Ryan, who is Homelander's biological son, who was raised by Butcher and Becca, who has his father's powers and none of his conditioning. Ryan becomes the show's most important figure in the final act not because of what he does, but because of what he represents. He is the control experiment. He is the version of Homelander that got something different in the first years of his life. He got a mother who held him. He got people who told him no. He got consequences. Small ones, human ones, the kind that teach a child that other people are real, that the world does not reorganize itself around a single point, that discomfort does not always require a target. The question the show forces into the room when Ryan and Homelander share scenes is this: is the difference between them nature, or is it those early years? Is Ryan safer because he is fundamentally different, or because he was handled differently? The show does not fully answer this. It leaves the tension intact, deliberately, uncomfortably, but it tilts toward the second answer in a way that makes the first several seasons retroactively more disturbing, because it means that what Vought did to Homelander in that lab was not the discovery of a monster. It was the manufacturing of one. Homelander's final confrontation does not go the way he has planned anything in his life. The environment itself feels wrong to him. The sounds are off. The geometry of people's positioning registers as threat before he can isolate why. For the first time, the variables are not manageable. For the first time, the people around him have stopped performing loyalty and started performing something else entirely, and he can feel the shift even if he cannot immediately identify it. There is a quality to the silence in the room that he has never encountered before, a stillness that is not deference but something more deliberate. His response is the response of someone who has never learned any other tool: maximum force, immediately, with no calculation of downstream consequence. What stops him is not a more powerful superhero. It is not a weapon designed specifically to kill him, though those exist in the show's world. What stops him is something he has never been able to fully process. Someone who could hurt him choosing not to. Someone with comparable power making a different decision. Ryan, standing in the moment with every capability Homelander has, every volt and every beam and every physical advantage, making the opposite choice. Choosing restraint not because he lacks the ability to do otherwise, but because somewhere in his formation someone taught him that ability and action are not the same thing. The shot that ends Homelander's story is not triumphant. It is not cathartic in the way action finales usually are. The sound design is quiet. The color is flat. It lands with the weight of everything the show has been building for 4 seasons, pressing down without release. Because what it confirms is not that good defeated evil. It confirms that the outcome was never inevitable. That the person Homelander became was not the only person he could have been. And that gap between who he was and who he might have been is where the real horror lies, not in the laser eyes, not in the body count. In the distance between 2 versions of the same person, one of whom got something the other never did. After the credits, one detail remains. Somewhere in a Vought facility that was never fully decommissioned, its corridors still lit by that same cold, fluorescent hum, its files still locked behind clearance levels that no longer have anyone to authorize them, there are 47 other subjects from the same early compound program that produced Homelander. Their files are sealed. Their current locations are listed as unknown. Their compound V exposure levels were, in 6 cases, higher than his.